All right, so my name is Corey Anderson. I'm the president of the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group, and I'm also the presenter today, so you'll be hearing from me a lot today. This is our general overview or agenda for today. For about 20 minutes, we're going to have our welcome and our general business, which is what we're doing right now. And then for 10 minutes after that, we'll hear from our meeting sponsor, Walters Kluwer. And then approximately 2 hours is our main presentation, Customizing NetSuite. That again will be presented by me. And then from after that, we're going to hear from Rick Cobb, and he's going to share some tips and tricks. And then after that, we'll have our open forum. And during the open forum, you have the opportunity to ask any questions that you have or follow up with any questions from the meeting, anything that wasn't quite clear. And so pretty much anything goes in the open forum. If we can't answer the question then or find an answer to it, then we can follow up on it in our LinkedIn forum. So our membership, right now we have 1,153 members as part of the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group. Membership is free, and you can register at rmnsug.org. Notification of upcoming meetings and events is what you're going to get when you register to make sure that you know when the meetings are and then if we have any special events. As a member, you also have access to our LinkedIn forum. Our LinkedIn forum is a closed group so that it doesn't get spammy, and so that I'll talk about that group in a little bit later. We also have a $400 discount to Suite World that's available to our user group members. And then as a member, you are also entitled to CPE credits when you attend the meetings. We'll have 2 credits available for today's meeting. So if you are not a member, please sign up. So I also want to mention real quick that we have been operating, or the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group has been operating since 2008. It started in November, and so this is our 12-year anniversary of the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group, and we've definitely grown quite a bit over those 12 years. So by my calculations, this is our 73rd meeting, because we do 6 meetings a year, and we've been doing that for 12 years. Maybe my math is a little off, but it's give or take 1 or 2 meetings. So I'd like to ask real quick, and you can go ahead and post this in the chat window. So how many meetings have you attended? How many Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group meetings have you attended over the last 12 years? I know that we have some folks that are here that have been a lot. If you don't know for sure, just estimate. My estimate is I've been part of the user group for about 6 years now. So I'm estimating that I have about 33 user group meetings under my belt. And looks like we're getting a lot of people posting. So far we have, let's see, Dana Larson, it has 60. Yeah, that's good. Somebody just signed up 10 minutes ago, so that's good. 3 or 4, 7 or 8 for Peggy. Kim Williamson, 15 or more. So good. We have a couple of first timers in here. Diane Simmons, yep, 8 to 10. I feel like more than that, Diane, but maybe not. I've seen you a lot for a while. Margie, 80, because we used to meet monthly. So Margie Cominos is one of the founding members of the user group, and she has been to virtually every single meeting that we've ever had. I think there's maybe a couple that you've missed over the years, Margie. So I'll let you guys go ahead and keep posting in there as I go on. This is fun to see. I like that. So first time, a lot of first timers. So welcome if this is your first meeting. All right, let's move on. So also part of our membership is the LinkedIn user group forum. You have access to that. We have over 500 members as part of that forum. And the purpose of the forum is to support each other with questions and answers, to follow up with questions and answers from our meetings. We also use that as our main form of social media, if you will, to post our announcements. We announce when our presentations are available, notes, discounts to when the discount to Suite World is available, things like that. And then we also really like to use that, or let our members have you guys use that as a place to post job openings. If your company is looking for looking to fill a specific position, or if you personally are looking for a new position that is NetSuite related, you can post that on the user group on the LinkedIn forum. So where you can find us, our website is rmnsug.org. And on our website, we have all of our old meetings that we record are posted on our website. Also, the vast majority of the slides from our meetings are posted there as well. We post our tips and tricks, and, and we have basically all of the information that we've ever gathered from our user group meetings is available on our website. And I just want to show you that real quick. I'm going to switch my screen so I can show you what our website looks like and how to find past meetings and information. So this is the main homepage. The main thing is to go to our posts to find old information. And basically our posts are, each post represents a meeting. And so we have here, you can see that this was the Suite Script for Non-Scripters meeting from, when was that? That was 2 months ago. This year is just a big blur, I apologize. And then previous to that was our NetSuite 101, but you can see we go all the way back on the right-hand side here. And if you want to search for a specific topic, you can say, let's find saved searches. And it'll bring up any meetings or tips and tricks that involve saved searches. And so you can see we have quite a bit of information on saved searches over the years. So that is our website and where you can find past information. Okay, now I'm going to share something else. Okay, go back. Also, we post all of our meetings on our YouTube channel, so you can watch the past meetings from our website, or you can go directly to YouTube and find our channel and watch and subscribe if you'd like, and then watch our meetings from there if you'd prefer. And then also our LinkedIn forum is linkedin.com/groups/5099096. You're probably not going to remember that. If you just search for Rocky Mountain NetSuite User Group at the LinkedIn, in the LinkedIn main search bar, then it'll pop up with our user group. If you're not a member, you'll need to request access, and because like I said, we do restrict that to our user group members. So we don't just let anybody join, although it is free to be a member of our user group, so anybody can essentially join. Okay. So I'd just like to take a moment, if there's any member announcements, if anybody has any job openings or is looking for a job, anything like that, you can post it in the chat window and I'll announce that over to everybody here. I'll just take just a minute if anybody wants to post a chat. And if you don't want to do it right now, you can also post it on our LinkedIn forum later on. So I'll take just a minute, let anybody post an announcement. Anybody? So Kim Williamson, let's see. Kim recently formed Decipher Consulting to help with NetSuite implementations and configuration. Rindy, we are hiring a purchasing person that needs NetSuite experience. Okay. So please feel free to post those on the LinkedIn forum as well. Kevin says Stages Cycling looking for a general accounting clerk based in Portland, Oregon. Carla, Home Advisor looking for a senior accountant of financial reporting. The job postings on the LinkedIn and their website. Yeah, so that's a really good point. You can post the URL in this the chat window here as well. Paula says Kim Williamson at Decipher is fantastic. Can't recommend her enough. That's great. Okay, looks good. Thank you all for posting, and then you can follow up on the LinkedIn form if you haven't posted that there as well. Thank you. So I just take a moment here to introduce the board. This is the Rocky Mountain NetSuite User Group Board of Directors. We work behind the scenes to bring you these meetings and to keep everything organized and to make sure that we can do CPE credits for you. And then eventually when we can meet back in person, we organize all of the meetings in person as well, which takes a lot of effort. So that's me in the upper left-hand corner. I'm the president, and then we have Margie Comino. She's our sponsorship and membership chair. Margie is with PlantScan Corp. We have our communications chair, Mike Kackline from Vertifor. We have our speaker chair, Peggy Evleth from RSM US. And then our treasurer, Dana Larson from Dana Larson Consulting. So thank you to the board for everything that you do. I appreciate everything and look forward to working with you all for a long time. Couple of reminders: evaluations will be emailed to you to complete the same day today. So please complete those evaluations. We do look at those and we use those to drive our content for future meetings, and also any recommendations for improvement over what we're doing. We definitely read those and try and make things better as we go along through the years. And then also, please register for events using the same email as your membership record so you don't end up with two memberships. We use NetSuite as a production NetSuite account to run the user group. And so it's just like a customer record based on email addresses. If you sign up with one email address, but you've signed up with a different one in the past, you might get multiple emails from us over time. We can consolidate those, but it does take a lot of work. So please register using the same email on an ongoing basis. Meeting sponsorship. So membership to our user group is free, as I mentioned. The cost of meetings is supported by 2 levels of sponsorship. We have Suite App sponsors and consulting sponsors. Suite App sponsors must be available through suiteapp.com, and consulting sponsors must offer NetSuite consulting services and have certified NetSuite consultants on staff. You can sign up for either sponsorship type at rmnsug.org/sponsorship. It gives you all the information, or I would say most of the information you'll need to know about sponsorship there. And you can also contact us at info@rmnsug.org if you have further questions. So our upcoming meetings, January 2021, we have our Save Searches meeting. So that'll be a deep dive into Save Searches, which is always a very popular topic since it's such a useful feature of NetSuite. In March 2021, the theme is cache. So this one we haven't really done before. We're still working out the details, but we're going to be talking about bank recs, bank feeds, electronic bank payments, basically all of these concepts that around the concept of cache in NetSuite. And so we'll be building out the content for that over the next couple months, but that should be a fun topic. And then May 2021, we have Suite Tax. So this is a little bit of a combined meeting. So Suite Tax is a new capability of NetSuite, and Suite Tax is going to be standard in most accounts or most new NetSuite accounts starting in 2021, according to NetSuite, but it is going to be a standard feature moving forward. So we're going to do a deep dive into Suite Tax, and then we're also going to combine that with advanced PDF templates, because who wants to hear about taxes for 2 hours straight? So advanced PDF templates, we'll do a little bit more of a deep dive into that as well, and how to modify those, how to basically do all of the cool things that you can do with advanced PDF templates. We'll touch on those a little bit today as well, but not super deep on that. CPE credits. So we do have 2 CPE credits available for today's meeting. Certificates will be issued within 15 days after today. That's our goal. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer, but sometimes it's shorter too. But that's kind of a rough guideline on that. If you have any questions or problems with your CPE credits, you can email info@rmnsug.org. And CPE credits are sponsored by Eide Bailly. The keywords for the CPE credits are going to be coming. This is a CPE compliance slide that we have to show for this. So CPE and attendance credits. To receive CPE credit for attending today's session, you must sign in and out of this session using code words. the facilitator, me, will provide the first code word at the start of the session and then provide a checkout code once the session is complete. So you can log in with your computer, click the link that was provided to you in the email, and then fill out the information and enter the check-in and check-out keywords. If you pre-registered for this meeting and you signed up that says, you check the box that says you want CPE credits, you should have received an email on Monday night that said important instructions to get CPE credits, and there will be a link in that email to give you the login, the URL to be able to check in and check out. I will also post that URL in the chat window once we get to that point. So I would like to say, first of all, thank you to our consulting sponsor, Nolan Business Solutions. Nolan Business Solutions is an international solution provider who has helped thousands of companies solve their business problems by implementing leading mid-market business systems and custom-developed software applications for over 30 years. Within the Nolan Business Solutions US division, located in Boulder, Colorado, we focus on providing enhancements, consulting, and implementation services for NetSuite. Our team consists of accredited accounting, programming, and technology experts who are NetSuite certified professionals. Whether the result is a standard NetSuite system or suite app, we will work with our customers to ensure they get maximum payback from their solution. And I'll also just mention really quick that Nolan Business Solutions created the fixed assets module and essentially sold that to NetSuite. And so the fixed asset module is created by Nolan, and they support that module as well through their consulting services. So thank you, Nolan Business Solutions, for being our consulting sponsor today. And then also thank you to our Suite App sponsor, Wolters Kluwer. So Wolters Kluwer is our Suite App sponsor, and we're gonna hear from Phil Phillips for about 10 minutes or so. And then there is also a URL here, which I'll post in the chat window, which you can sign up for a drawing. And I think Phil will tell you more about that here in just a minute. So I'm going to pause my screen share and we'll switch over to Phil Phillips. So please hold just a moment. I have to find Phil in the list. Okay, Phil, you should be good to share your screen at this point.
Excellent, thank you. Corey, let me know if you can see it.
Yep, we're good to go.
Okay, thank you. As Corey said, my name is Phil Phillips. I am the Wolters Kluwer Partner Manager. And I represent the NetSuite. I actually came from NetSuite. I'd like to start off by saying Happy Veterans Day, and to all the veterans in the crowd, thank you for your service. One of the things Corey mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit the fact that SuiteTax, he mentioned that you couldn't do 2 hours without being too boring. I'm going to try to make it less than 10 minutes because it is a subject that a lot of people don't like to have a lot of conversation on. So a little bit about Wolters Kluwer. We're based in the Netherlands. We have about 18,000 employees. We've been in existence for over 182 years, but in the United States, we purchased CCH back in 1996. And I work with the tax and accounting division. We've got 4 major divisions, but under the tax and accounting, we really have a lot of solutions. Like specifically for me, I'm in sales and use tax. We have other groups that would sell to software to accountants, but we've got a lot. Matter of fact, it's very possible a lot of your firms are customer of ours in other areas today, research and learning or CPE areas like that. We have been providing the IRS really for 13 years going on now. All of the sales rates that are used. A little bit about, it mentioned SuiteTax. What we have a solution. Our solution is a tax engine that bolts onto SuiteTax. So we're one of the tax engine rules and regulations. In May, when you learn more about SuiteTax, what I've been told by a lot of the SuiteTax product management team is that you're probably, a lot of the companies, maybe 60% of the companies will no longer need an external tax engine if you upgrade to SuiteTax, simply because the rates are there for both sales and use tax capability. What we do and other partners will do then is look at what capabilities are or what's required really afterwards. I've listed some of the more complicated industries, and these are industries from a sales and use tax perspective that even though they may deploy SuiteTax, they may require some additional sales and use tax by a company such as ourselves. And some of the calculation requirements, again, that go below, these are reasons why SuiteTax, you would need something in addition to that. So even something as simple as a tax holiday. But these are the types of things that we do. We work with you individually to determine where you are and how we can best help your company. That pretty much is it. I just want to basically say what we do is we work with NetSuite. Our product is the SureTax, CCH SureTax, and I'd be happy to work with any of you. As Corey also mentioned, we do have a drawing. Please complete that. We're having $200 Amazon gift cards, and we're going to be drawing that on Monday. So I'll be the person hopefully sending you an email to congratulate you. Thanks, Corey. Back to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Phil. We appreciate you sponsoring. Thank you again. And we have not had the check-in code yet, Katie. The main presentation hasn't started quite yet, but we'll get the check-in code here in just a minute. So I'm going to take just a minute to switch back over to my slideshow, and we can go ahead and get started with our main presentation today. So please give me just a moment. Okay, first things first, I'm going to post the check-in code, or I'm sorry, the check-in URL in the chat window here. Make sure that goes to everybody. So you can go to that URL and sign in with the check-in code. Our first check-in keyword is happy. So I'll leave that up for just a minute. It is happy. Let me organize my screens. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our main presentation. So our main presentation today is customizing NetSuite. And again, I'm Corey Anderson. I am the NetSuite Managed Services team lead for Eide Bailly. Managed services, basically, we work with clients day in and day out, optimizing their NetSuite systems and basically doing a lot of customization based on their business needs. So a lot of what I talk about today is something that I do all the time. And yeah, Peggy, put Eide Bailly guest for the firm in the check-in. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started on this. So first of all, an introduction to customizations. I'm going to get my little laser pointer here. So there are a lot of customization options that we will cover, but there are some that we won't have time to cover today. So my goal is to show you what some of the possibilities are. What you can do with the customization features in NetSuite is only limited by your imagination and creativity. And so I say this because as I was going through making this presentation, I'm thinking, oh, we could go over this and we could go over that and we could do all of these crazy things, and I could spend 8 hours going through all of these customizations, but I only have 2 hours, and so there are going to be some things that I won't really be able to touch on, but I've tried to identify what I feel are some of the most important customization features that you might use on a day in and day out basis. So throughout the presentation today, I'm going to have little SAID numbers. That is a Suite Answers article ID. So Suite Answers is typically, if it's not now, it might become your best friend for helping you administer and navigate through NetSuite. Suite Answers will give you all of the help articles on specific topics, but then it'll also show you responses to cases that have been opened by NetSuite customers over time, and then NetSuite will post those responses in Suite Answers as well. So the Suite Answers article IDs that I'm going to post are basically the help files for the different topics. And those help files will give you a lot more in-depth information about whatever the specific thing that we're talking about at that point. So these slides, again, we do post these on our website, so they'll be available within a week or so, posted on the website, so you can come back and grab this slide deck. You don't necessarily have to write all of it right down right now, but it'll be available to you later on. Also today, I recommend that you follow along in your NetSuite account if you can. It'll be helpful to help you see what's going on and maybe visualize things a little bit better as we're going through everything. All right, let's go to our next slide. So these are our main topics today: custom fields, custom lists, custom forms, and custom records. And we'll basically go in that order. I feel that it's important to understand. It's kind of like we're laying the base of a pyramid, and we'll start with custom fields. So we'll spend a lot of time on the first part and then move on from there. So this is just my best guess at what our topic percentage is going to be today. So this yellow piece represents demonstration. So I'm estimating 26% demonstration today. Fields, custom fields, also 26% of our time will be spent talking about that. Forms, we're also going to spend quite a bit of time talking about. Then we'll talk about custom records. I have this as a smaller piece of the pie today because again, these are some of the things that I want to get into, but probably won't have time to get into a lot of detail. I've also been kind of brainstorming a second customization meeting, like an advanced customization. And so maybe we do like a potpourri meeting later on where we go through a bunch of different advanced customization topics and dive deeper into some of these more advanced things. And then this small piece is custom lists. There's not a lot of information or not a lot that goes into custom lists, but it is important to understand how they work. So I'm going to go through that today as well. If you have any questions throughout the morning, please feel free to post those in the chat window. I will try and watch that window if any questions come up, and then Dana can interrupt me if I miss something, or maybe our board of directors can help answer some of those questions in the chat window as well, since we're all very NetSuite knowledgeable. All right, let's go ahead and jump on in here. We're going to start with custom fields. So first of all, we need to talk about the kinds of custom fields that are available in NetSuite. So I'm going to go through a bunch of information through slides, and then we'll go into a demonstration after we get through a lot of this information. So kinds of custom fields. First of all, we have custom entity fields. So entity fields in NetSuite will apply to customers, vendors, employees, contacts, partners, or groups. So when you're going in to start creating custom fields, you have to be thinking about where the custom field is going to show, what type of record that you want the custom field to show on. And so you'll start with this, and this is going to identify where you're going to start. Custom item fields. Custom item fields apply to inventory, non-inventory, service items, other charge items, groups, kits and packages, and also assembly and bill of material item records. Custom transaction body fields. Custom transaction body fields, I think, are, I use these the most throughout working with clients and helping them customize their systems. Custom transaction body fields apply to sales orders, invoices, purchase orders, opportunities, web store transactions, and item receipts. This is not an all-inclusive list, but this is just a sample. So basically a transaction body, think about if you look at a sales order or an invoice in NetSuite, the main information at the top of the screen or at the top of that record is the body of the record. And so if you want to create a custom field that shows it in the top of the record, the top section, for example, then it's a transaction body field. So the other option is a transaction line field. So transaction line fields are going to apply to things such as expense items, purchase items, sales items, store items, or opportunity items. So if you're thinking about that same sales order or invoice, for example, when you go down to the items list, you see a list of of the items that were part of that sales order, part of that invoice. If you want to create a custom field that shows in the line level, then that's where you're going to do, this is where you're going to create that custom field, transaction line fields. These are also called custom columns. So you may hear these referred to as custom columns on the lines on transactions. Next, we have custom CRM fields. So CRM fields will apply to things such as tasks, events, campaigns, or cases. So if you use the CRM system in NetSuite and you want to create custom fields, this is where you do that. Custom transaction item options. So used to add fields to the line items of your transaction record, such as purchase items, sales items, web store items. When adding a custom field to the line items of a transaction, you apply the field to the type of line item. Then we have custom item number fields. Item number fields are used to add custom fields to serial and lot numbered inventory records. This isn't quite as common if you don't use basically advanced inventory features. This may not even show up in your account. And so that reminds me, if you go to your account and you're going to the customization menu and then list records and fields, you may not see all of these options there. It depends on what features are enabled in your account. The last one we have here is other record fields. So other record fields used to add fields to custom records that are not defined by the above categories. So that includes campaign events, classes, competitors, departments, and locations. So other record fields is kind of like a catch-all for the record types that don't really fit into the categories above. All right, we'll go ahead and move on here. So let's start talking about the custom fields in detail and about what they do, how to set them up, what some of the features of these fields are. So first of all, I want to talk about some commonly used types. Now there are, I didn't count, but there's maybe 20 or so different custom field types. So these that I've listed here are some of the more common types that I find in accounts and sometimes need to create on a regular basis. A checkbox field is basically, it's exactly that. It's a field that is a checkbox, and it either has a check in it or it doesn't have a check in it. Checkbox fields are very useful if you're trying to designate on a record that something happened. For example, if you have NetSuite connected to an external system and you want to know if a specific invoice has been exported to an external system, you can create a checkbox that says exported to such and such system. If that checkbox is checked, you know that that invoice has been pushed out of NetSuite into that external system, depending on how you connect to that external system. Checkboxes can also just be used for internal use, just to say that maybe a specific customer is a VIP customer, for example. You can have a checkbox that says VIP, and so anybody in your company looking at that might say, oh, that's a VIP customer, that type of thing. You can also use checkboxes basically as a Boolean yes/no value in saved searches and things like that. So Susan has a question. Can a custom field be used to add a subtotal for quantities on packing slips, invoices, etc.? We do use lot serial number items. Yes, you can absolutely do that. And so there's a couple of different ways to do that, Susan. And actually, I plan on showing some of those options a little bit later on. And how you do it specifically in your system, I can't say for sure, but I'll give you some ideas and point you in the right direction on how to do that. So moving on, some of these other fields here, basically the type of field that you choose determines the formatting of the data that's in that field. So in a date field, for example, it enforces a date, basically a date value. You can't just put in like a numeric number in a date field. It's going to error out and it won't let you save it. An integer number is a field that is basically a whole number. It doesn't support decimals. So an integer number is like 1, 2, 3, 122, I don't know. But it basically is a number field. And then a decimal number field is the same concept, except it accepts decimal numbers. Another one is currency, and currency is the same thing as the other two, but currency is going to be basically just that. It's going to be 2 decimals afterwards. So all of these number fields, they support being used in numeric calculations. If you're using some other function in NetSuite to use, or if you're using one of these fields in a numeric calculation somewhere later, you can't use, well, as far as I know, I never say never, but essentially, like if you were to use a free-form text field and you put a number in that field and you want to use that in a calculation, it most likely will not work correctly. And so you would want to make sure that your field type is a currency or an integer number or a decimal field if you want to use it in a calculation. So list record, we will actually go through a list record example a little bit later on here, but this is basically a field type that you define whether you define the results of that field. So they can be a list, which we'll go through, and then or it can be also a record type. So I'll go through that in a little bit later, but a list record field is very powerful, can do a lot of fun things in NetSuite. Free-form text. So all of these text fields right here are essentially the same thing. They give you the ability to just enter text into that field. Here are some of the character limits, up to 300 characters for free-form text. Text area is 4,000 characters. Rich text is up to 100,000 characters. And long text is up to 1,000,000 characters. So really depending upon the type of data that you need, I would say use the smallest amount that you can. And I think in most cases that I see, a free-form text field up to 300 characters is adequate, but there may be sometimes, like maybe you have let's just say you have a custom disclaimer that you define per customer or per vendor, and the 300 characters doesn't cut it for what you need to put in that disclaimer. So then you might use a 4,000 character or 100,000 character field. So those are the basic, some of the commonly used types, and again, it's not all inclusive. There's definitely a lot more field types available. If you go to customization and then lists, records, and fields, click on entity fields, item fields, transaction body fields, this is going to be one of the main drop-down boxes where you'll see that type. And we'll go in and do a demonstration of this in a little bit so that you can see how this works. There's also some other custom fields that are, I guess, worthy of mention are hyperlink fields where you can put in a URL and basically it's a hyperlink directly to something else directly from that record. There's also an image field where you can link to an image that's stored in the file cabinet in NetSuite. A lot of fun stuff there. Excuse me. Yeah, so Angela, the slides are definitely going to be available on our website later on. So Suite Answers, article number 10085. It is a table of all of the custom field type descriptions and as much detail as NetSuite has available about those fields. So that is your Suite Answers to go look at all of that fun information. All right, so throughout the presentation, I'm going to recommend some best practices that I've found over my time working with NetSuite. Doesn't mean that it is the NetSuite official best practice. It's a lot of it is my opinion, but it's also based on experience from using NetSuite over the years. So first of all, when we are creating a custom field, you really want to understand the field type thoroughly before you're choosing a field. So you want to think about what type of data is needed. Is it a date field? Is it going to be an email address? By the way, if it's an email address field, NetSuite will enforce standard email field requirements, like it has to have an @ symbol and it has to have like a .com or .net or something like that. If it's a field like I mentioned earlier where you're going to use it in a calculation, you want to make sure that it's a currency or a integer field or a decimal field. So how will that data be used? Is it just going to be data that's static on a record, or is it going to be used in calculations later on? You want to consider those things when you're choosing the field type. And then a word of caution is to choose wisely, because changing the field type will erase all data in the field that is currently on records. So let's say, for example, you choose an integer field type and you start using that field, and a month later you determine that you actually need decimals in that. If you change from an integer to a decimal, and NetSuite will warn you before you make this change, but it'll erase all of the data that's currently in those fields. So in that situation, what I'd recommend doing is getting an export of all of the records that have the data in those fields, and then you can re-upload after you change the field type. And then, so Margie has a tip. I believe that some of the longer text types, rich and long, may not be displayable in a saved search. Yeah, that's a really great point, Margie, because in a saved search results, it'll have like an ellipsis ... at the end of the values, because it just won't display all of those values. So that's a really great point, Margie. Okay, so some other best practices, fill in the values. So this window right here is basically the key values that I want you to think about filling in when you're creating custom fields. First of all, the label field right here. Label is what will be visible on the record. If you decide on a specific value for the label and you decide to change it later, you can customize that on the form that that field is a part of. But really, you want to try and make sure that that label is what you want to be visible, because it'll just create more work later to change that label. The ID. This is an internal ID. And this field it's really important to label or to use this to be a descriptive field. If you don't put in an ID, and you'll notice the label has an asterisk right next to it, that one's required. The ID field does not have an asterisk. It is not required by NetSuite that you fill in that field. However, if you don't fill in that field, it'll give it a generic name, such as custom entity item or custom entity field 22, custom entity field 85. And so if you're using the internal IDs, let's say, for example, you want to use these in an advanced PDF and you want to modify an advanced PDF, it's a lot easier to use a internal ID that has a descriptive label. So if let's say, and actually I'll show you an example of what I mean for that later on. But basically, make sure you please fill that in, because it's just best practice long term. The description field is for internal use only, and I find that a lot of times, somebody will create a custom field, and then a year or two later, somebody else, a new NetSuite administrator, comes in and they look at that and they're like, well, well, what the heck is this field for? Like, why did they make this in the first place? If you put in that description, that is going to define basically why you created that field, what the purpose of that field is. So it's not necessarily going to be useful to you right now, but it's basically setting up your account for success in the future as well. And it could be useful for you as well. If you're, sometimes you'll go back in and you'll be like, oh, I already created a field for that. Or you have a field that's named something that you don't remember making. If you have that description, it helps. It's basically an internal reminder of what it was made for. And then also it's not on the first sub tab here, but it's going to be, I think it's on the display sub tab. There's this help field. When you use the help, when you populate the help field, if somebody clicks on that field name when they're looking at a record, then it'll pop up with whatever you put in this help. So it is absolutely a best practice to populate the help values. If you don't populate it, then your users will not necessarily know what the purpose of that field is. And honestly, what I do a lot of the time is I'll take the description, whatever I put up here, and I'll just copy it into the help field so that we have an internal view and an external view of what the purpose of that field is. Okay. Maureen says she hides Easter eggs in the help fields, like little nuggets of information or little tips and tricks. That's a good idea. That's funny. Okay, so the last thing that I want to mention for best practices is that you want to apply to forms. So I'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but the apply to forms function allows you to specifically choose where or what forms that this field is going to show on. If you don't use the apply to forms option, then it'll just show up in a whole bunch of places that maybe you don't intend. All right, so I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail here. So custom fields, so applies to. So this is if you're looking at, I'm going to go back real quick. So this is the main section, and I've kind of highlighted the applies to. So now we're looking at the sub-tab values on a custom field that we're creating. So applies to. So applies to different options will show depending upon the type of field that you're choosing. So for example, if this is a transaction body field, transaction body field these are the different options that you might see under the applies to. If it's a custom entity field, custom entity, instead of purchase, sale, opportunity, journal, it's going to say customer, vendor, employee, basically any of the entity types that are available in your system. So here is where you choose the record type that you want to add the field to. You can add or remove these options later, but as I mentioned, the best practice here is to use the apply to forms feature to control exactly where the fields show. So if you don't use the apply to forms feature, basically when you choose, let's just take the purchase, for example. Say you check the purchase box and then you don't hit save and apply to forms, you just hit save. Basically what NetSuite is going to do is any form that is in the flow of record types within a purchase is going to get that field put on it. So what do I mean by that? A purchase. So if you think about a purchase order, what are the downstream fields from a purchase order? We have an item receipt, and we also have a bill. So if you just hit save, then that field is going to basically automatically show up on all of those records. Well, if you're creating a field that's specific to a purchase order, you may not want that field to show up on an item receipt or on a vendor bill. So that's why I recommend using the apply to forms, because then you control exactly where this field shows up. Using the apply to forms will also help you see the related transaction types, such as a cash sale when choosing sale. So if you're looking at purchase and you're like, well, I don't really know what other records are related to a purchase, such as item receipt or bill, then you can use the apply to forms check the purchase box, and then all of the forms and the record types that it will apply to will automatically be selected for you. I'll show you that in the demonstration a little bit later on here. So that's applies to, and very important to determine where your field shows. So we're moving over to the next sub-tab here. This is our display. So the display, insert before. So this is going to define where the field is placed on records. And it's the same thing with the sub-tab. The sub-tab where the field will appear by default. Personally, I don't use these features to determine where the field will show on the forms. I prefer to go to the form afterwards and move the field to exactly where I want it to show, because you have a lot more control of where it shows if you do it on the form later on. And I will demonstrate what I mean by that. You can certainly choose options here, insert before and sub-tab. Sub-tab might be useful if you don't. So basically, if you don't choose anything here, NetSuite will create a new sub-tab called Custom on your record automatically, and then any custom field that you create by default will show up in that custom sub-tab, which isn't a problem. Because like I said, we're going to go to the form later on and we're going to move that field to the right place that we want. So if it's in custom, that's great, because then I always know where it is to start off. So in the display type, this is how you can choose basically how your field displays on the records. So display type normal means it can be edited. So if you edit the record, you can go to that field and you can change the contents or the values of that field. This display type of inline text, it's not editable, but it can be populated via a calculation or something else like that. And I'm going to show you how to populate fields via calculations here in a little bit. But basically, if it's an inline text display type on a record and you go to edit that record, it won't change. It'll just still be a value that's not editable. Disabled. So disabled cannot be edited, and also it will not display if there's no data in the field. Really disabled, I feel like you use it if you've created a custom field and you don't necessarily want to use it anymore, but you don't want to completely delete it from the forms. You can disable that field here. And then hidden means that field cannot be seen on the form pretty much no matter what. But the hidden feature should not be used for field level security. So what do I mean by field level security? Let's say, for example, you want to keep track of how much maybe your employee's personal salary, and you want to store that on the employee record, but obviously you don't want that visible to everybody in the organization. So using this setting right here is not the way to control who can and cannot see that sensitive information on the employee record. I will show you how to do that here in a little bit. So if you're creating these custom fields, disabled and hidden, just not really used that often, but there are certain use cases for those. The other thing is that if you are creating, if you have a workflow that runs on a specific transaction, you can use a workflow to set the display type of that field. And it's basically just temporary while that workflow is running on that field. So you can make a field disabled or hidden via workflow. All right, we're going to move on to our next piece of information here. So also in the display, so we have a display size option. So width and height options will show depending upon the field type. I think mostly this applies to text area field types. You can define how big the box is on the record for custom fields of text area. If you change to like a checkbox or a date field, this display size information will go away. It just won't show there anymore. So it does depend on the type of field that you're using. And then the help. Oh, I don't have the information here, but the help is going to be like if you're looking at the record, it's over here on the right-hand side. This is where you'll fill in with details about the field, such as the purpose of the data and how it is sourced or used in calculations. And again, that's an external. I say external. That's your NetSuite users, so they can click on the field and it'll pop up the little help window and describe what it is. And again, that's a best practice. Make sure you fill that in. Okay, next sub-tab over, validation and defaulting. So the options here also depend upon the field type. So different things will come up. Mandatory. So you can make this field required on the forms that it applies to. There are some use cases where you want to make it mandatory. That means that basically before somebody saves the record, they have to populate data in that field if it's mandatory. Another option is to modify the form to make that field required. Oops, I got a typo there. So you can create this field and not make it mandatory on all forms that it's on, but maybe there's only a specific form. Maybe you have a sales rep team and you want to make sure that the field is required for the sales reps, but maybe not for the sales manager, for example. And so you can make it, you can define a specific form for the sales rep and then make that field mandatory when a sales rep is entering a transaction, for example. Some of the common options that will show up here, depending upon the type that you're using, we're going to maximum length, minimum value, maximum value. So those are really self-explanatory. They do what they say. So if you have maximum length, it'll give you, that's basically a character limit. If you have a minimum value and maximum value, those are going to be numeric values that if you try and store the record with a value outside of one of those, then it won't let you save the record, basically. All right, let's move on. The next thing in validation and defaulting, I think, is one of the most powerful things about custom fields that we can do. First of all, our default value field. So the default value field can be static, or it can be a calculation using a formula. And I'll give you an example, or I'll show you an example later on of using a formula in the default value field to populate information on a record. Here's well, I'll come back to that in a minute. So the search is basically the same concept as a value or the formula field. You can define the results from a saved search calculation. The advantage of using the saved search to populate the field value is that you can basically, I mean, you can almost do anything you want in the calculations in saved searches. So it's a much more powerful way of creating values in that field than using the formula option. Formula option is going to be very limited. It's going to be limited basically to that specific record, and you have the standard SQL functions like a case. You can do a case when statement. You can do basic arithmetic in the default value. In the saved search, you can, for example, go to a customer record and you can sum up all of the transactions that they've had in the past year and give a total value and then display that on the custom record. Or on that customer record. You can't do that with the default value, but you can do it with that saved search. So a couple of pieces of information about, I guess some gotchas on using those values. So the default value, this value can be seen on saved search results, and it can be used in workflows without any additional calculations or anything else happening. If you use the search to populate the value, it cannot be seen on saved searches or used in workflows unless it is a stored value. And I've talked about this in the past. I did a tip and trick on it. I use this capability a lot when I want to use a saved search to calculate the value of a field. But then usually you want that value calculation to be available in reporting later on, or you want to use it in a calculation in a workflow or something like that. So if you go to our website, rmnsug.org/posts, search for dynamic field. And basically what I do there is I show you how to create a saved search to populate a value in a custom field. And then with a very simple workflow, you create basically a second field that stores the value. So then that value from the save search is available in reporting and other areas of NetSuite to be used. I'm not going to go through that today because it's quite a bit of, well, I guess it's just outside of the scope of what we're doing here today. But dynamic field, I've described it on our website. So you can go check that out. Okay, so sourcing and filtering. This is going to be, I think this is the last, oh no, we'll also talk about the access. So basically the sourcing and filtering allows you to source the contents of a custom field from a related record. So in this example, we're sourcing the country from the customer record on a transaction. So this, you can see how I've set up this custom field. I have the label, customers, country. You can see how I did the internal ID. I did an underscore, customer underscore country. There is a character limit there. Sometimes you have to kind of like abbreviate different things. You could say CUST for customer instead, for example. You can see I've put in a description, tells what it does. This is a free-form text field, and I'm going to store that value. And so in the sourcing and filtering, the source list is the customer, and then I'm going to source the country name from the customer record. And you can see that this is a transaction body field. So think of a sales order or an invoice. This field will show the country that that customer is in, for example. Maybe you don't have customers in other countries, but I have used this this exact example for a customer. So that's the sourcing and filtering. Also very cool. And then we were actually chatting about this internally. Dana and Margie and I this week were talking about the functionality of this, and Dana pointed out that and this is true across like almost everything in NetSuite. If you create a field that sources a value, that does not retroactively go back to all of the records that exist in NetSuite and populate that field. It'll only populate if you edit the record and save it, or if it's a brand new record. So that's just one thing to be aware of, and that's a very common theme in everything that we do in NetSuite. So Diana asked a question: can you source the internal ID? Yes, Diana, you can absolutely source the internal ID into a custom field, and I've used that specifically for an approval process in a workflow where you have to populate a transaction in that record. I think it was an expense report. It needed to source the internal ID of the project so that the workflow would work correctly. So yeah, you can definitely source the internal ID as well, and then use that in a workflow later on. Maureen has a question. So the source field will update the data as long as you edit and save the record it's on. Yes, Maureen, that's in most cases. I'm not going to say always yes, but in most cases, yes, that should be what happens. And Dana says yes as well. Okay, let's go ahead and move on from here. Okay, so custom fields access. So the access gives you the ability to control who can see or edit the field. You can restrict this by role, department, or subsidiary. So this is where you control access to sensitive information or fields that only apply to specific people in your company. So in this example, what we have here is this is the default setting on new fields, new custom fields. The default access level is edit, and the default level for search and reporting is edit. So let's go back to the example of, let's say you're storing your employee salary in a custom field in NetSuite. You obviously don't want that information to be available to just anybody. So the default access level here, you would change to none. And then the default level for search and reporting, you would also change to none. The other option here is view. I'll show you this later on if I don't know if I have that in my notes to show, but I'll try and remember to show you the access later on. Then you can define the role that field would be available to, and then the access level that role would have. So you can say view only or edit. you could say, I think none, view or edit again, also for the search and reporting. So typically, if you do this, I recommend that you put in an administrator. And maybe that doesn't fit for your business purposes, but typically administrators are going to have access to almost everything anyway. And even if you don't put administrator in here, they have the ability to go in and add administrator to this list. So you might as well do it anyway, I guess, in most cases. But let's say you only want your director of HR to have access to this field, for example, then you would define that role here and that they can access it. And then that basically means that anybody that goes to view that employee record that's not the HR director will not even see that field. It's not visible for them at all. It doesn't show up. They can't access it in any way unless they're using that role. And again, you can also define a department or a subsidiary that applies to as well. So I have a little note down here that is handy for testing new fields as well. So let's say you're testing out some new fields and you don't want it to cause confusion with your users if it's just something that you're working on. So you can remove the access to this field except for administrator access or whatever role you're using, and then you can use that field for testing and it doesn't cause confusion later on. So I like to use it for that as well. Okay, so Dana, Corey's suggestion was to run a save search of the record you want to retroactively update, then select a blank field that you can update. Import and update only using CSV, using the internal ID, and then set the blank field to null. This will update and save every record, which will in turn update your new field. So that was the outcome of what Dana and Margie and I were talking about, is that if you, on the sourcing and filtering, if you want to update those fields in mass, that's the technique to do that. Okay, so let's move on. And so now we get to go into demonstration. So I love this guy. He's so happy about getting to see a live demonstration. He's jumping through the air. All right. So give me just a second here. I'm going to switch screens. We're going to go to a NetSuite environment. And where do I do that? Share something else. Okay. So, yep. Okay. So here's, so this is a NetSuite demo environment that we use for the user group. And I just want to mention before I dive in here that this, sorry, hang on just a second. Okay. This environment has a ton of features and functions enabled that it's like almost everything available seems like it's enabled in this account. So as I navigate through here, there are going to be things that show up here that you're probably not going to have in your account. So just understand that this is demo environment and it has a lot of stuff enabled that's not necessarily common. Okay. Okay. So first thing that we're going to do, we're going to create a new field on a customer. So I'm going to go to customization, list records and fields, and we're going to go to entity fields. And you can either click on entity fields to take you to a list of the current custom fields, or you can go to new. I'll just go directly to new. Okay. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to create a field called billing email address. And so this field, I guess the intention of this is if your customers have a specific email address that they want their invoices sent to, you can use this field in a workflow to send those invoices to your customers. Otherwise, there's typically one field on the customer record that the system will use by default. But we find oftentimes you don't necessarily want to use that field for billing. Okay, so following my best practices, I'm going to name this field and I'm going to give it an internal ID, billing email address. So then it's very clear what that field is, whether I'm looking at the internal ID or if I'm looking at it in an advanced PDF, whatever it is, it's easy to find. the description for this field. Oh my gosh. Try typing with 100 people watching you at the same time. This is the email address the customer wants invoices sent to. Okay, so best practice, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go right away over to my help field under the display subtab. I'm going to paste that in. That way I don't forget to do it later on. Let me zoom in just a little bit here, okay? I'm going to go back to my applies to. So this is an email address, and so I do want to choose in this example the type of email address, and that way NetSuite will enforce basic email address structure. So it won't let you save it if it's not typed in right, like with the @ symbol and a .com or a .net or something like that. I want this to apply to customers. And so I'm going to go ahead and check that box. But before I'm done here, I'm going to actually apply this to forms. And some of these other fields, I didn't go through what they do, and I'll just kind of briefly describe them right now. But again, you know, Suite Answers is going to have a lot more information about this if you need to understand what these do. But also, you can click on these fields. It'll pop up the help, and it'll give you information about what the purpose of that field is. So store value, this is always going to be checked by default. Store value means that that value is stored on the customer record, and then it can also be used in searching and reporting later on. If that value is not stored, you uncheck that, then then basically you would uncheck it if you're going to do a calculation or something like that, or dynamically update that field or source that field potentially. It won't be available in searches and reports if it's not a stored value. So stored value is an important piece of it. This record is parent. We're going to talk about that one a little bit later when we're talking about custom records. So I'll come back to that. These other fields I'm not really going into detail because they're like just usually the standard options are fine. Okay, so applies to the display. Again, I don't choose where it goes here. I like to customize the form instead. I put in my help. I don't need to do anything else on this one, so everything is fine. And so I'm going to hover and say save and apply to forms, and I'm going to show you why I do that. So basically, remember I chose customer, and so if we look at this account, these are all of the customer forms that are available in this account right now. And so I don't want this to show up on every single customer form. I only want it to show on a specific form. So I'm going to say unmark all, and I'm just going to choose these first two. So basic customer form and GB customer form. Some of these other forms are going to be, for different purposes. Maybe you do want it listed on every form. That's fine. You can leave them all marked. But I find in a lot of situations, we don't want these, custom fields to apply to every single form. The other option here is if you want to rename the field later on, you can come back in here and you can rename this field. So let's say maybe you want to call it, I'll do it on this one. Instead of billing email, you want to call it invoicing email address. So you can do that. So on this form, basic customer form, it's going to say invoicing email address. On this form, it's going to say billing email address. I'll leave it like that for now. So I'll go ahead and save. So I've just created that custom field. Okay, we're going to come back later on when we're talking about forms, and we'll move that field later on. So days overdue on invoice. This is I'm going to do another field, and this is going to be a transaction body field. So we'll go to customization, list records and fields, and then we'll do a transaction body field and new. So in this example, I'm going to create a field that does a calculation that shows how many days the invoice is overdue. Okay, so we'll call it, let's just call it days overdue. And again, we'll go here. Okay, and then This is pretty straightforward, but again, I always recommend doing that. Oops, sorry about that. I'm going to go to my display, paste that into the help. That's just my process. This is going to be I can leave this as a free-form text field. I could make it a numeric value if I wanted to. I'm not using it in any calculations or anything later on, so I'm just going to leave it as a free-form text field. It's adequate for this purpose. What I'm going to do now, though, is define where this applies to. So we're going to want to apply it on invoices. So we're going to choose sale because an invoice is downstream from a sales order. So I'm going to check that, but again, I'm also going to do the apply to forms when I'm done. I'm going to go next to the validation and defaulting tab. And what I'm going to do is just put in a very simple calculation here. So I'm going to say today is not what I wanted to do. Today minus due date. And we'll check the formula box. So basically, when this field is on an invoice record, it's going to give us a number of days that equals today minus the due date of that invoice. So in a sense, it's going to show us how many days it's overdue. So for this field, I think that's all we're going to do. So I'm going to save and apply to forms. And if we scroll down, we can see, so remember I chose sale. So all of the downstream possible record types from a sale are going to be checked by default. I don't want that to show on inventory count and inventory transfer. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense. I don't want it to show on credit memos or anything else. So I'm going to go again, unmark all, and then I'll go to invoice, and let's say I probably want it to show on all my invoices. So I'm just going to check all of my invoice forms, pretty much no matter where it happens, but I don't need this field to show up on any other record type or transaction type in NetSuite. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save this. And so there we've created two custom fields. We'll come back and we'll use those custom fields later on. I think what we'll do right now is I'll go back in. We're going to talk about custom lists, and that will be a relatively short piece of the puzzle here. And then we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back and dive into custom forms and custom records. So I'm going to switch my screens back to, sorry, hang on just a second. And we'll go here. Okay, so that was the demonstration for custom fields. Now we'll move into custom lists. So custom lists, as I've mentioned, they're very straightforward, but they're worthy of mention here because they have quite a bit of functionality that we can use them for. So to do a custom list, you're going to go to customization, lists, records, and fields, and then lists. So basically, these are used to create a custom field with predetermined value options. The advantage is that it maintains the uniformity in your data. So if you don't want your NetSuite users populating fields with random values, you have a preset list of what that field should say, one of those options, then you create a list to populate that field. So it allows you to use the values to trigger other actions such as workflows as well. So if you use workflow to trigger off of the value of a field, and you want to make sure that field is a very specific value or one of a set of specific values, you can't just have people randomly typing in different things in that field. So then you would use the custom list. So very straightforward. You do a custom list. My best practices apply here as well. So you're going to do the name of the field, the ID, put in a description, and then the last thing that we'll do is put in some values. So there are definitely a lot of other things that you can do with custom lists, but I mean, really they're pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to go jump back into my demo and show you. I'm going to create a custom list for this purpose. Okay, let me find my notes. Okay, so we'll go to customization, list records fields, and then lists, and I'll create a new list. So for this purpose, I'm going to create a list called rejection reason. I promise I can type better when not 107 people aren't watching me type. So this is, let's see. And there are no help fields for this because we're not creating a field yet. This is just a list that we can then apply to a field. So up here on the right-hand side, we have some other options. So I'm going to enter some values down here below, and this will determine the order that those values will show up. So we can say, show them in the order that they were entered, or automatically put them in alphabetical order based on basically the first letter of the value. If you are creating a matrix item or a set of matrix items, which are basically variation items where you have a parent and child options, you would you'd start by creating a custom list of those values. So for example, if you wanted to create a matrix of t-shirts, you're going to have different sizes and different colors. So you would create a custom list called t-shirt color, and then you would list the different color options down here, and then you would choose matrix options list or matrix option list. And that will make it so that that list is available to create matrix items from. That's the purpose of that. So the next thing that I'm going to do, the last piece I got to do for this one is I'm just going to put in a list of reasons that are available to this list. Let's see, research pricing. And so these are just kind of some fictional reasons. So the purpose of this, you may be thinking like, what the heck is this for? I'm going to show a demonstration later on of creating a custom record that's going to use this list as one of the values for a field. And I'll describe that later on, but we'll come back to this and I'll explain what this is going to do a little bit later. So for custom lists, that's about it. There's not much else to do. So I'm just going to save this. And we'll come back. Like I said, we'll come back and use that a little bit later on. So I think we're at about an hour. So we're going to take this opportunity to take a short break. I will pop this slide back up and let's see what time it is here. I have 9:53. Let's come back just a couple of minutes after 10 o'clock, and then we'll jump into what's after that, custom forms. So let's take a break and we'll be back. Jump back in to the presentation. So let's start on our custom forms. So custom form types. There are basically two types of forms. A form is the page used to enter information into the NetSuite database. It is also the page that you look at. The form is what shows when you're looking at a specific record. So there are two types of forms. We have entry forms and transaction forms. So entry forms are used for record types that are not transactions. So think about anything that's not a transaction, an item, a customer, a vendor, an employee, basically anything that is not transactional based. And then we have transaction forms, which are used for all transaction record types. So sales orders, item fulfillments, invoices, bills, journal entries, etc. So anything that is a transaction will be under transaction forms, and anything under that's not a transaction is under entry forms. And so we'll talk about some of the differences there. So again, I'll have some best practices for using custom forms. So custom forms, basically, I want you to think about creating a custom form for all of your common record types. And so what I usually recommend doing is starting with the pre-built form and then make a new version and customize it. So if you're looking at a list of custom transaction forms, for example, if you see the customize, that means that that form is a standard form from NetSuite. If you see an edit button, then that means that that is a form that has been customized from one of the standard forms in NetSuite. So another best practice on custom forms is to remove fields that are not used in your business processes. The goal here should be to have clean, uncluttered information. If you take on the standard forms and you customize it and then don't remove fields that you don't use, what we find a lot of the time is that it just ends up confusing people. It confuses your NetSuite users, and they may start putting data into fields that don't get used, and they may think it means something, but it doesn't actually do anything in your system, or nobody ever responds to it. So best practice is to remove the fields that you don't use. And then also with your custom custom entity and transaction forms is your naming convention of your forms should be consistent. So for example, if your company name is Acme, you would go to the standard sales order form, you would customize it and name it Acme sales order, or Acme purchase order, or Acme customer form, or whatever it is. So those are the some of the common best practices that I recommend. So we'll talk about some of the settings on these forms. First of all, store form with record. So the store form with record, this ensures that your records are viewed and edited with this form, regardless of who was viewing or editing the record. So let's say, for example, somebody goes in to create a sales order, a sales rep goes in to create a sales order, and they go to the custom form drop-down menu and they choose some form, and that form is not marked as store form with record, and it's also not the default form for the company. Then when that salesperson stores that record, and then when somebody else in the company goes in to view that sales order, they may not be viewing the same information that sales rep put in, because it's not the default form or the preferred form for the company. So if you want to make sure that the form that was used to create the transaction is always viewed when viewing that record, click the store form with record button. Form is preferred. This will be the default form that is used unless forms are set at the role level. And so form is preferred basically means that whenever somebody goes to create a new transaction or a new record, an entity record, a customer or an employee or whatever, this is the form that will come up by default if this is set as form is preferred. You can only have one form as preferred set for each record type. As I was creating this presentation, I also thought there are these other ways to control how forms are viewed and used in the system, and you can set those at the role level. And so I'm thinking that, and I don't think we've ever done this, the user group, we've ever done a presentation on roles and permissions. Maybe we have a long time ago, but not that I can remember. And I think it might be a good idea to have a meeting based around roles and permissions and go through how to set things up and all of the ins and outs of that. If you think that's valuable, that might be valuable in the evaluation today, please post that you might think that would be a valuable topic for us to go through at some point in the future. Use for pop-ups. So this is, when you check this box, basically, this is the form that will be used in pop-ups when you add a record of this type from another record. So for example, let's say, well, I'm trying to think of a good example. If we have, so if you're on a sales order and in the sales order, there's a customer box, and then there's a little plus icon, and you click the plus icon, it will pop up a form to enter a new customer, to create a new customer. So whatever form you have set as used for pop-ups, that is the form that will be used to enter that new customer information. If none of your forms have used for pop-ups checked, then it'll just use the preferred form, the form that is marked as form as preferred. Okay. So some other settings. So we'll go through. I'm not going to go through every one of the sub tabs for the custom entry forms or for custom forms, but I'll go through some of the key things that I think are information. So field groups. When you're looking at a custom form, you're going to see sub tabs, field groups, fields, actions, all of this information. Field groups is the field grouping that you will see on a record. So if you look at field groups, the first sub tab here represents the sub-tab on the record. And then below that are the groups that will be on that sub-tab. So the main isn't a sub-tab, it's the main part of that record, but it'll define the field groups. And I'll point that out a little bit later on here, what that looks like on the record. So if we look at here, so the primary information, so if we look at main and then primary information, this is the field group. And then if we look, I kind of cut it off, but underneath primary information, it says email, phone, address. You can see there's a bar here, and that starts that new field group down below, but it's still in the main section of the record. So that's what field groups do. Oops, let me move on here. Next sub-tab over on custom forms is fields. So the fields is where you're going to control what shows up on the form. So all the fields that are either showing on the form or available to be visible on the form. This is where you can disable the fields from showing on the form. So before, remember when I mentioned we're creating custom fields, and let's say you just hit the check the sale button and don't do apply to forms, and then you want to go in later and remove that field from a specific form, this is where you would do that. So you would come to the field sub-tab, and you could uncheck the show button. Now, some of the fields are grayed out when you're looking at here, and you can't uncheck it. That means that those fields are, NetSuite won't let you remove them. They're required to be on that form. But anything else, you can uncheck if you don't want it to show on the form. Here, you can also make those fields mandatory, and then you can set the display type. So remember, you can set the display type at the custom field level, but you can also change the display type as it applies to just this specific form. All of these settings will only apply to this form. The other thing that you can do is, you see the little checkerboard over here, you can grab that and move these fields up and down in the list, and that'll determine how, what order they show in the form. So that's, I prefer to do it this way to modify a form and determine what it looks like. So next tab over is actions. So the actions, they determine the action that can be performed by the users when viewing a record that uses this form. Those actions can be shown as a button or in the drop-down actions menu. So under standard actions, these are, I don't remember what record type I pulled this from. It's I think a transaction, right? Maybe an invoice. So these are the actions, and then this is a cutoff. So over to the right-hand side of this, then it'll say show that action or uncheck it to not show that action. And then you can say display that action either as a button at the top of the form or in the action drop-down menu. So this is where, if you don't want a big button that says print, on your form, then you can move it to the menu, or you can remove it completely when anybody is looking at this form. So that's the actions. Next tab over is sublists. So sublists determine which sublists are available on the form. So examples of sublists are relationships, communication, addresses, related, records, and etc. So the sub list, you can go in and you can uncheck to not show that sub list. Some of those sub lists are going to be required to show on the form, but you can control what shows via going to the sub list subtab here. Now the sublist fields, this is an important distinction because we have the screen fields or that field subtab that we talked about earlier, and then we have the sublist fields. So the sublist fields are the fields that will show in the sublist. So for example, if we're looking at an items, the list of items on a sales order or an invoice, these are going to be the fields or the columns that will show in that sublist, and you can turn those on and off. Some of those fields are required, some of them are not, and so you can add those or remove those from your sublist here. This is a little bit limiting though. It's not like the screen field, so you can't make these mandatory from here, and you cannot set a display type. So on the sublist fields, basically all you can do is do a show or not show, but you can also change the label. So if you wanted on hand to say OH instead, to abbreviate for space or whatever, you can change it to say OH right here. So you can rename, change the visibility. For entry forms, the sublist field shows in the field subtab. So this is a transaction form example. On entry forms, there is not a sublist fields tab. There is only a fields tab. And the sublist fields are lumped in with all of the fields for entity entry forms. Well, not just entity, but entry forms in general. One other cool thing that I wanted to mention is this item filter that is visible under the sublist fields tab. So the item filter, this allows you to create a saved search that will limit the items that are available to be used on this form. So the example here is if you have a specific, let's say a specific sales rep or a specific customer, you can do various things to make sure that this is the form that gets used for that sales rep or for that customer. And then you can define or restrict the items in your system that are available to be used on this record, basically. And we were actually having some discussion about this, I think Dana and Mike and I earlier, and about how to restrict these items, and this is how to restrict items by customer, and this is one way to do it. I think there's other ways to do it, which in NetSuite almost always multiple ways to achieve the same thing, but this is one of the coolest ways to do that, I think. Okay, so custom forms, printing fields. So we're going to talk about printing in a little bit here in the different types, but what you may notice on some of your forms is this printing field subtab. So the printing fields only shows when the basic printing type is selected, and in this section you basically choose the fields that will print, and it'll be divided by section. So you'll have header, footer, body, and columns. And so this will apply to the basic printing type, and I will show you an example of that a little bit later on here. But that field you may see. If you don't see it, then that means that you have the advanced button checked for your printing types on the form. So the last tab here is the linked forms, and basically the linked forms allows you to choose which forms that the downstream transactions over the related transactions are going to use when you start with this form. So this only applies to transaction forms. You're not going to see this on a entry form. And you can determine the forms that will be used automatically with related records. So if this is, let's say that I believe this is a sales order form. And so we can say when an order starts from this form, then we want this to be the cash sale form, we want this to be the invoice form, we want that to be the item fulfillment form, and so on. And then you can also define a custom packing slip form from here as well. So that's the linked forms. So at this point, we'll jump back into a demonstration. Let me switch my screens. I missed that question. Okay, Margie answered that. Okay, great. So let me find my window, share that, and we'll go here. Okay, so for my forms, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new customer form. So I'll go to Customization, Forms, Entry Forms. And I'm going to find my standard customer form. So here we can see this is our standard customer form, and it says Customize. So I know that this is the default form from NetSuite. So I'm going to click Customize. Demo account, a little slow. Bear with me. Boy. I'll just read this question Deborah posted real quick. Store form with record. I want the form that the record was created with to be what is viewed. Not sure if this should be checked. And so yes, Deborah, the answer is you want the store form with record box to be checked. That is the purpose of that. Okay, so here's our custom entry form. This is our customer form. I'm going to rename this Gil customer form. I'm going to follow my same best practices in putting in an internal ID. And so we can see here, these are the tabs or the sections that we just talked about: sub-tabs, field groups, fields, actions. The actions, this is a little bit better view of it, so we can change this option over here to view those actions. Let's see. So what I want to do is I'm going to move a field that I created earlier. So remember I created that billing email address field, and you can answer like to yourself, but anybody remember where, or you can paste it in the chat box, where did I say that that field is going to show up by default if I don't define it on the custom field setting? Anybody want to post in the chat? Yeah, that's right, the custom tab. So we'll go to custom. If I want to find that billing email address field that I created, it's going to be in that custom tab because I didn't define a place for it. So you can see right here. So I'm not going to move that yet. I'm going to go ahead and save this form. I'm not going to do any other customizations. So I'm going to save, and then I'm going to edit right away because I do want to go back in and move that. I could hit save and move elements. I prefer to just do a save first, and that way I just know that I've saved that form. So I'm going to go back to my fields, go to custom, and I don't really have to go here to do this. I just like to go back and verify. Boom, there's my field that I want to do. So now I don't want this field to show under the custom tab. I want it to show somewhere that's a little bit easier to see when you're looking at this form. So I'm going to hit move elements between subtabs. May have to decrease my demo time based on the speed of this account. Let's see here. Apologize for that delay. Take a sip of water. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now I want to move a field. So basically, it's the same list of subtabs. So I'm going to go back to custom. I'm going to go to billing. I'm going to check that, and then I'm going to define where I want that to go. So I really want that to be in the main section, the main header section of the record, so that it's easy to see. So I'm going to choose main. And while main isn't really a sub-tab, it's always going to be under the sub-tab list. So I'm just going to hover and hit save. And then I'm going to save one more time. It's probably going to say it hasn't changed. I do want to save it anyway. And so let's look at a customer, relationships, customers. We'll say new. With any luck, it'll have the form. I didn't mark that form as preferred, but we should be able to choose. That's not going to let me. Oh, here's our form. So typically, so this primary customer form, this is the one that's marked as preferred, but in most cases, this form drop-down box is available. So if I click right now, notice that that billing email address is not here, but I come to the custom sub tab, and it's not. I didn't add it to this form, so it's not even showing at all. So I'm going to come to the Gill customer form. And there's my billing email address that I moved to the main section. So it's always going to put it at the end, and then if I want to move this field to a different place in this form, then we can go to customize form, and I'll show you how to do that real quick. So fields. Now I know that the billing email address is in the main sub-tab. And if I want that to show in a different section, I want it to show in the primary information, for example, I'll come over here, I'll click primary information, and then you can see that it popped it up into the primary information area. And then let's say that I want to put this email address next to, is there another email address? Let's just put it under, let's say, the company name. So I'll grab that, I can drag it up, and then I'm going to save that. Let's go back real quick. And we can just verify that it did move. I'm going to choose that form again. So now I can see there's the company name and there's the billing email address. So it started out on the custom sub tab. We moved it to the main, then it was down here, and then we moved it all the way up to the top. So in this way, you can fully control how your forms appear to your NetSuite users. And then again, I highly recommend that you go through here and remove fields that you don't use. For example, fax, probably not very common anymore. So you can remove that field so it's not even visible on the form. Hot lead, you can remove that if that's not necessary. So there's going to be a lot of default fields that are going to come up on these forms that when you make your own version of it, again, I recommend going through and just cleaning it up so that it's only the information that you need for your business processes. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to go back to the demonstration. I had another field demo, but I think that it's essentially the same thing, so we'll skip over that right now. All right, so let's go back to my demo. I'm sorry, back to the slideshow. So next thing to talk about is printing. So printing from transaction forms or from forms in general. I'm sorry, it does apply to transaction forms only. We can choose an advanced or a basic printing type. So on all forms, by default, the basic type is enabled. And when you're creating a custom transaction form, this is where you'll choose either the advanced or the basic. And remember that sub-tab called printing fields, if you choose basic, that's the printing field sub-tab is going to show up. If you choose advanced, you're no longer going to see that printing fields option because the fields that print on advanced PDF templates are defined on the advanced PDF template instead of through the form settings. So here's an example of the basic printing transaction form. So this is called transaction form PDF layout. This is a WYSIWYG style editor. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. I say WYSIWYG style because it's challenging, I would say at best, to get this form to really customize this. You can add or remove elements and change the layout of this, but it's relatively limited, the functionality that you get. These forms, if you use these basic forms and you print them out, they look like they came straight out of 1985. And if you want a little bit more modern version or modern look to your forms, then I highly recommend getting into the advanced PDF and HTML templates. So advanced PDF and HTML templates, they give you a WYSIWYG style editor to modify the forms, and it's definitely, I would say, easier to navigate and easier to use. But there's also a code-based editor that gives you full control of the layout. The code-based editor uses free marker language. It's extremely flexible and extremely customizable. Basically, if you have a little bit of HTML skill and you understand, the basics of HTML, you can jump into the code-based editor and kind of make your way through modifying this. It can get a little bit dicey when you start messing around with the header sections and the footer sections, and I highly recommend looking up FreeMarker, and if you want to do these advanced customizations, it's not like rocket science. Like most people I think would be able to figure out how to modify this if they're comfortable, doing a little bit of HTML and stuff like that. You can use, like I said, though, the WYSIWYG editor here, but it just doesn't give you quite as much flexibility as using the code-based editor. So those are the basic printing types. I'm going to go into NetSuite and just show you what those look like. So I don't recall what I set on this form. Let's go look again real quick. Oh, that's an entry form, so it doesn't have printing, sorry. So I'm going to go to customization and then forms. And so when I look at the transaction form PDF layouts, and the transaction form HTML, these are the basic layouts. And then the advanced PDF HTML templates are where you can get into the code-based editor. So I'm going to first of all show you the transaction form. I'm not going to go through all of the details of how to do this. I just kind of want to give an overview of what it looks like. But basically, you create a custom layout, and then you apply this layout to the form that you want it to print out on. So you can choose the page size, you can choose a custom page width. I've used these layouts in the past to create custom labels like UPC or barcode labels for items. So you can use this you have to use this type of form or layout to modify that. And so, you can choose the page width and height there. Down here, this is the WYSIWYG section. If you choose a different box, you'll see that the element over here changes. It shows you the width and height of the element, the position. You can change where it's anchored to. Over here on the right-hand side is the formatting options, so you can change the font size, whether it's bold. And if you want to add an element, you would add a custom element, and then you can add different things to your form here. So you could pick a field, and then that's going to be a new element that you can add. I'll say okay, and you can see right where my cursor was, or I can actually, it puts it in the upper left-hand corner, and then I can kind of drag it down and put it somewhere else. How this would actually look on the form is it's a little bit of trial and error, but you can drag it, drop it. You can change some of the name of that. So let's say you want to say, I don't know what that was, but we'll just say account, right? So it's just really basic flexibility. And that's about all there is to the custom or to the standard basic layouts. like I said, it's trial and error. You kind of have to go in here and modify something, and then go to a transaction and print it out and see what it looks like. The preview here is kind of rough. You can't really, you may not really know what it's going to look like until you and print it out from a transaction. I recommend that you use a transaction as an example as you're going through this. But you can see it's very boxy, very ordinary, just kind of a straightforward basic layout. The other option is the advanced PDF HTML, which honestly, I don't ever use the basic layouts. If we need to modify a form or add fields or do anything, we'll typically switch it to an advanced PDF layout first, and then go with the standard setup and then do the modifications from there. So let me go down, and I'm just going to find I'll just find a sales order real quick. So standard sales order, so I'll customize this one. And so I think it was May, we're gonna do a deep dive into the advanced PDF and what you can do with this. I'm just gonna show it to you basically right now so that you can see what's going on. So these are the functions that you can use to modify this in the WYSIWYG style. You can hit preview, it'll open up a PDF preview, and you can see that, you know, it's definitely a much nicer looking modern form. This logo is too big, that's why that address is pushing over. So you do have to sometimes go to the source code and do your editing from there. So again, the source code, a lot of it is HTML based information and CSS, if you're familiar with CSS. Then it uses some of the FreeMarker basics to be able to modify these. But basically you can put any field you want from that record into an advanced PDF form. So that's kind of the basics of what that looks like. All right, so from here, I'm going to go back into my slideshow, and we're going to move on to our last section, custom records. So custom records, Suite Answer ID number 10140. So this will give you a lot of detail about custom records. So basically, custom records allow you to collect and track information in your account. They are used to bridge any gaps that NetSuite might have to help you with your specific business needs. So at the very beginning of this presentation, I asked, or I mentioned that the customization features are really only limited by your creativity and imagination, and custom records are a really powerful way to help you do other things in NetSuite that it doesn't do out of the box. Some of the examples that I can think of or that I've done for custom records is a rejection record. And I'm going to actually go in and create a rejection record today and show you how that works. One of the examples NetSuite gives you is an employee training courses record. And so if your employees are required to go through training for certification or whatnot, you can have a custom record on that ties to the employee record that shows the training courses that they've been through. You can also do customer surveys or events. So I mentioned earlier that the user group, we use NetSuite to manage and run the user group, and we use a custom record called events to manage each of our NetSuite user group meetings. And those events help us track the Suite app and the consulting sponsor. We used to use it to help us track the location, even though, but we're basically in the same location now. The presenter, the date, all that information. So we basically created all of the custom information we need for that event in a custom record in NetSuite. Does anybody else have any other examples that you can think of for custom records? Please feel free to go ahead and paste that in the chat window. And that's just to kind of give some other ideas if anybody has any other use cases for custom records. In the meantime, I'm going to jump in and get through some of this. So custom records, best practices, same thing. It's enter the custom, enter internal ID. Same format as we've been doing all morning long. Enter a description. A couple of new things here. I recommend to uncheck the include name field on custom records. If you leave that checked, then this field is required on new records of this type. I personally haven't found a use case for it yet. Maybe there's somebody out there that needs that, but I always uncheck it. But then I always check the show ID. And so this ensures that the unique system assigned ID number is visible and searchable. So if you think about your transaction numbering system, you might have like a SO 18924, right? So that would be the ID of these custom records. So you can define a continuous naming or ID numbering system by using that. If you don't check it, then it's not available on the records. I feel like that's an oversight. I feel like that should be checked by default from NetSuite. I don't know why you wouldn't want that to show. So after you, as you're creating this record, then you have to save it, and then you're going to edit to add different fields to the record. So some of the things that I'm going to point out for custom records, there are a ton of fields, a ton of things that you can do on these custom records, but I'm not going to go through all of those today because that's going to be more of like, our advanced customization meeting topic. Parent-child relationships. There's an article in Suite Answers 91075 on parent-child relationships if you want to dive in and understand this a little bit better. But basically, custom records can be a parent or a child of another record. So in the example I'm going to do today, a rejection record would be a child of a purchase order. And so the purchase order, you would go to a purchase order, and then if we have a rejection record that's a child of it, it will be on a sublist or a sub-tab of the purchase order record. The key with the parent-child relationship is to create one field that is a list record type on the child record. And on that field, you mark the option record is parent. So what that means is that the record that is defined in this field is the parent record. I'm going to show you how this works when I do my demonstration, which is going to be right now. All right, let's go back here. And I need to bring my notes back up. Okay. So custom record. So we're going to go to customization, list records fields, record types, and then new. All right, so I'm going to go through quite a few steps here to get this set up, and then I'll show you what the final result is when we're done. I guess my goal here is to kind of bring everything together that we've talked about today. So I'm going to use some custom fields. I'm going to do a custom record, and we're going to use that list that we created earlier, and then I'm going to apply this to different transactions, and I'll show you how that works. So there's a lot of information here, a lot of these fields. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of these. If we get into an advanced meeting, then we'll talk a lot more about all of that information. I'm going to go through the essentials. Most of the time, I think you can leave a lot of that at its default settings and be able to use these custom records properly. So I'm going to call this a rejection. And so let me describe. The purpose of this is I'm creating this custom record to work in tandem with a workflow. And the workflow basically is a approval process. And what I can do is I can create this custom record and I can use it in any approval workflow process. So if I want a PO approval or a bill approval, sales order approval, journal entry approval, I could, actually, I'm not sure about journal entry. Yeah, it should be the same. You can use this custom record as part of that workflow. And so basically you can put a reject button on the workflow, and if somebody clicks reject, it'll open up a rejection reason or a rejection record. They put in the reason and then they save it, and then that rejection reason is stored on that transaction that they rejected. in this scenario or in that scenario, you would put the workflow into a rejection state, and then it could be maybe modified and then put back through the approval process. So anyway, that is the purpose of this rejection record type that I'm using. I'm going to put a description. Okay, thank you, Grammarly. Okay. Okay, so we have all of that. I'm gonna check that, uncheck that. Those are the two main things that I'm always going to do. Let me see what else I need to do. Okay, so that's it for like the initial creation. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna save and then I'm gonna edit, because if you'll notice right now, there's no fields sub-tab down here. I need to save it first and then I can come back in and add the fields that I want to show on my record. So now I can see the fields. I'm going to click New Field. So I'm going to create 3 different fields. First one is my rejection reason. Rejection. Okay. For the sake of time, I'm not going to do my description. Please forgive me. We're going to go to list record type. And the list record is going to be the list rejection. Remember, I created that list earlier today. That's going to be the list of values that show up as available to be selected in this. Okay. For this purpose, that's all I need to do. I'm going to save. Did I say that? Save that as rejection reason? I guess we'll find out. Yeah, it should be correct. The next field I'm going to create is a rejection note. Okay, and that's going to be just a free-form text field. Actually, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So we'll do a text area on that one. I think that one was what, 4,000 characters. So that way somebody can write a note in there and as to why, like any more details about why they rejected it. Okay. So that's all I'm going to do for that one. I'm going to do save and new, because I'm going to create another new field that's on, see, it says rejection field. So I know that I'm still going to be creating this field for that custom form. And this one is the big one. This is the field that's going to link the rejection record to the transaction. Okay. So this is going to be a list record type, and the record type that I'm going to put here is for transaction. So when I do list record and transaction, that means that this basically will be available on all transactions in the system. Now you could go in and modify the individual forms like we've looked at earlier, and you can remove this rejection record from showing on that form. But when I set it up here, it's going to be basically by default on all transactions. Record is parent. So this is the most critical piece right now, is this record is parent. So that means that the transaction that I select in this field is going to be the parent of the rejection record. Okay. When I check the record is parent, then also what shows up down here is the parent subtab. If I uncheck that, you can see that parent subtab goes away. Record is parent. So now this is going to define where the record shows on the parent subtab. In this example, I'm going to put this under the system information. Sometimes you could put it, I like to put it in related records. Like logically, I think system information is an okay place for this. All right. So those are the key pieces to set up the parent-child relationship. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. This should take us back to the custom record. And so now we can see my fields down here. I have a rejection reason, which is a list record. I have a rejection note, which is just a text area. And then I have my rejected transaction. And this is also a record type. If I go to my parent record subtab here, it shows that the parent record is going to be the transaction, and that is showing because of how I set up this rejected transaction field. So that is the basic setup for this custom record. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then I'm going to show you what that'll look like on a transaction. So let's go to purchase order. I probably have one over here. I'll just do that. Okay, so there's my purchase order. And remember, I put it under my system information subtab, which isn't showing. What is showing? So this is showing related transactions. All right, well, that didn't work out. Let me go back to that record. I'm going to change where it shows so that it'll show up here. So that form has obviously been customized to remove the system information. PQRST, rejection. So we'll go back to our subtabs. Oh, nope, I take that back. We need to change that on this field. So let's put that under related records this time. Then we'll go back to our purchase order. Related transactions, and there it is. So that's the rejection, and you can see from here, you can create a new rejection from here. That functionality, I think you can change that on the record setting so that it won't let you do it from here. As I described before, the purpose of this is to work in tandem with the workflow to create a record that's attached to the purchase order if it's rejected. You can also create a rejection directly from here. So I'm going to go. So right now we're looking at a rejection record. And so you can see, oh, I did choose the wrong field for this dropdown. Let me go fix that real quick because I want to show how that works. Go back to my reject.
Hey, Corey, you do have a question
Okay.
about a sublist on a custom record?
Okay. Yeah. So the question is there a way to add a sublist to custom records similar to the items sublist? Oh, that popped up. Item sublist on sales orders. I would like to have a sublist on a custom record where I can add lines, and ideally I would like each line I add to have a parent-child relationship with the custom record. Poof. Also, can you create that parent-child relationship with multi-select fields as well as the list record fields you just showed? Alex, without really digging in deep on that, I mean, I think from a high level, yes, that should be possible. I'd probably have to look through that in detail to really see if we can do that. But I say theoretically, yes. If anybody in the audience has any ideas on that, feel free to post on it. I don't know that's like, I think that's a big question that is a lot to answer right now. But yes, I mean, I think fundamentally you can do that. The mechanics of getting that all lined up, I guess I just don't have worked out. But yes, I think you could do that, Alex. Let me go back. I'm going to find that that custom field and change rejection reason. I'm going to change the, yeah, that's the one that let's see, save that. Okay, so let me refresh this. There we go. So this is the list that we created earlier. And you can, so basically you can define the reasons that somebody can reject, that specific record. You can also just make this a text field if you want. So if you want them to be able to type in their own rejection reason, or if you only have a predefined set of rejections or of reasons, then this is where you would set that. Here's our rejection note. That's again that text area field, so we can type up to 4,000 characters there. And then this rejected transaction, you can see that this is already populated because I'm creating this rejection record directly from that purchase order. And if you use this in tandem with a workflow, then you would populate that rejected transaction field via the workflow so that it's connected to the record that it's rejecting to. So that is, that's it. I'm gonna just type that in. I'm gonna save this, and then we should be able to see these values that I popped in under this rejection. You can define what shows down here, and it's not actually, I forgot to do that, so it's not going to show that, but you could change it to show those values in this list right here, which would really be ideal, because you want somebody to be able to go to this purchase order and say, oh, it was rejected, what's the reason? Boom, here it is. Worst case scenario, they can click on this ID and it'll open up the rejection record and they can see the information there. Oh, it's over limit or whatever. So, okay, so that was a crash course in custom records, and hopefully that kind of helped bring everything together that we've gone through today. I'm going to go back to my my slideshow here, and I believe that is the end of the presentation, and I've ended pretty much right on time. I did have some examples set up for further demonstration in case I ran short on time, but I think we're pretty much right on schedule here. So here
You
is...
do have one last question, Corey. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sure. Paula, you referenced the mechanics of putting a customization in place. What suggestions do you have for organizing what needs to be built? Yeah, that's a great question, Paula, and I think it's super important that when you're creating these customizations that you map it out. You map out how you want it to work, who's going to be using it. I think it's important to talk with key stakeholders of who's going to be using the data. I think that it doesn't have to be super complicated, but write it down. Open up an Excel spreadsheet and start, maybe listing out the fields that you want. And then if you have a tool that you can create like a visual flow of how you want things to work, I recommend doing that as well. Such as like Lucid Chart or something like that, so that you can visualize how you want things to work first, put in the specifics of the custom fields. Who's going to use it? What kind of data is it? Is it going to be used in calculations? Talk to the people that are using it. And I think that that's really one of the most important things to doing like a big customization, like Alex was asking. If you're creating just a custom field, one field for one specific purpose, it probably doesn't require a big production to figure out what you need for that. But it just, I guess it depends on what you're doing. And Matthew says Excel now has a basic version of, is it Viso? Viso, okay. So Matthew, is that like a Lucid Chart? Oh, Visio. That's like a Lucid Chart tool. Cool. Yeah, so Excel, that's the way to do it. So you can help visualize, how you want all of your customizations to work together. Also, one other thing, Paul, I think it's important to document how things are working now. Like, how are people using the system now before you start making big customizations like that to change things around? Because if there are certain processes that are happening that you want to make sure are still part of the new customization, then it's important to have that documented. So, so our second CPE checkout keyword is winter. And with that, that comes to the end of the presentation today. And I'm pretty much right on time. So thank you all very much for spending your morning listening to me talk about NetSuite customizations. If you have any follow-up questions, anything that you want guidance on, please feel free to post it in the LinkedIn forum. And we'll take a look, and we'll try and help figure out how to help you move forward. One thing just I want to quickly note about the LinkedIn forum is that it doesn't like ping you. It doesn't let you know when there's been an answer to your question. So you do need to kind of go back and look at it on a daily basis. So yeah, so thank you, Scott. Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. And then don't leave. We have tips and tricks. Tips and tricks are going to be here from Rick Cobb. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and we'll take just a minute here to switch over for our tips and tricks from Rick. And Rick, I'm going to make you the presenter, and you can go ahead and take it whenever you're ready.
Corey, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Okay. Let me get things set up to, looks like we're on screen 2. At least what GoToMeeting calls screen 2. So let's.
All right. I see your screen.
Great. Let's see if I can move these drawing tools around. Oh, keeps going back. That's okay. I don't know if you can see that, Corey, in the top left. I can see it, but if it's just me, that's okay.
I don't see anything in the top left.
Okay, that's just my toolbar then.
Oh, okay.
Are we taking a break, or you want me to?
I think let's just go ahead and dive in.
Okay. Well, great. Folks, my name's Rick Cobb. I guess a longtime member of Rocky Mountain NetSuite Users Group. So this is, I think, the first time I've been presenting. We're going to look at Save Search tips and tricks. This will have a couple of assumptions behind it. And so number one is I'll assume you have some familiarity with creating Save Searches, which means we'll spend our time going in and showing you some cool things you probably haven't seen. The documents I will show you today, both a Word document and a PowerPoint slideshow, we'll make available to the group, probably on the LinkedIn forum. So that means don't worry so much about trying to memorize everything I'm showing you today, because you won't be able to. It takes a while, but the documents will have cut and pastable or copy and pastable things you can put in your own searches. So I really want you to just focus on the cool things you're seeing and start thinking about how you might weave them into your own Save Searches. There will be no test at the end of the session, so just sit back and enjoy that. Also, feel free to reach out after today if you have questions. I'll do my best to monitor the chat window, but Corey, Margie, Dana, please jump in verbally if I'm missing something. And Corey had 2 hours. I've only got 15 minutes, so I better get started here. So the types of things we're going to see in the Save Search would be let's see. The use of case statements. So case statements are used within formulas, which are one of the columns you can put into your Save Searches. So we'll see that as we go, and I'll show you different examples. The ability to use HTML code that will allow you to create things like a clickable link. So we'll be able to show you how to create a link in a column and click on that and go right to that record, for example. We'll be able to look at using, again, HTML code to create different elements in your columns, like, and we'll see a couple examples here, like the colored dots or squares to represent different statuses, or progress bars, to show, in this case, it's budget consumed and work complete, and be able to compare those. And then this is a really interesting one. I'm still digesting this. This was made by our controller, who, think about the ability to have a summarized row, or a row in your saved search, like the customer record, to show the customer balance, but then be able to show detail, like all the open projects that we have for this customer. So that's really interesting. I'm still testing the waters on that one. So with that, I think let's pop over to the Word doc so you can see that. So this is what we'll go through to drive our demos in real time. And this document will actually have more things. I'm only going to focus on the top 6 or 7, but there'll be more things in here that are of interest as well, just not Save Search related, but bonus for today's session. So the first one we'll talk about are case statements. So this is a logical statement you can use in a lot of different ways, but the premise is you want to test when a condition is true, and when it is, you want to return a particular result. If that's not true, then it goes and looks at the next condition. And if that's true, then I'll return this. And you go all the way down until maybe you have a default. Well, if nothing else is true, then just return this. So there's a couple different ways you can lay that out. But the end result is to do things like, maybe you want to take the dollar amount of an opportunity. And here we split this in our sales reporting into both projected license sales and projected services. And so let's pop over and see how that's done, in NetSuite. So I'm in one of our sandboxes. This would be an opportunity search that is used by sales to project, how much are we going to see in license sales or services in the next quarter, for example. So how do we do that? Let's go ahead and edit this search and take a look. So what we'll see is this is oh, hey, look, a pop-up. I'm going to save this for our next example. So let me snooze that for a few moments if we could. What this is showing us is a transaction search. It is a detailed search in the sense that it shows individual line items. And if we go look at an opportunity in the Save Search, what we're trying to do is figure out a way to say, I've got all these line items on my opportunity. Some of these are for software licenses. Some of these are for services. How can I split those apart and show them as one row on my search? And the way we do that is to, you'll see that this is summarized, so we're grouping by that opportunity. But here you'll see a couple of numeric formulas. So for those that haven't done work with formulas before, I'm going to go ahead and insert a new formula. So if I just type FORM, what this will do is show us the different types of formulas that you can use or create in your searches. And the currency means I'd return a currency as my result. Text means I'd return a text string. Numeric makes sense. So what we're going to do here is create a numeric formula, because I want to return a number. I could do currency, I suppose, as well. If you want something to show up in the summary search, you have to give it a summary type. And while it might be tempting, you think, to do a sum, I'm actually going to show you a different way to do that. So I'm just going to select maximum for now, and you'll see why in a second. And so if you tab over, eventually you come to the formula column. So if you've used case statements before, you could actually, create your own case statement. Case, when, dollar amount is greater than $100,000, and I'm going to return, let's say I'm going to create a pricey indicator, $3 signs for really expensive, 1 for not so expensive. So I could start typing that if I knew that, but if you don't, then you have a friend over here in this little expression builder. This will help you build your formula. So let's go ahead and do that and see what that looks like. So here would be a drop down that would say, here are some functions that you can pull in that are pre-built and case statement is one of those. And again, the case statement here will fill in the logic that says, for example, case when a particular expression is true, then I'm going to return something, and you can iterate and do that as many times as you want. Else, here's the default, and then we end. So let me keep most of that, and then we'll say, all right, so case, my logic is going to be when the amount field. So now let's pick a field. So let's pick the total amount for the opportunity. And I'm actually going to hand type this in. So I want to sum this up because I want to add up all the line items for the opportunity. And when the sum of the line items for the whole opportunity is greater than, let's say, 100,000, then I'm going to return $3 signs. So that's an expensive one, let's say. All right. Next, I'm going to say, all right, well, what's my next condition? When, some of the amount is greater than 50,000, then I'm going to return only $2 signs. Actually, I'm going to have to change this to a type of text because I'm not returning a number, am I? I'm returning a text string. Else, return a single dollar sign. And then I have an end statement. So if you think through this, this just says, if I meet my first condition, then I stop. If I don't, then I go to the next condition. I test it, then I stop, and go on. So let's click the set button. I'm actually going to come over here and change my type to formula text because otherwise I'll get an error. And let's go ahead and save this and see what it looks like. Oh, error. Excellent. Great for a demo. Hold on a sec. And just in the interest of time, if I don't see it immediately, I'll just.
Do you need a when in front after the first case, after the case?
If I didn't, I do.
Case when.
Case when. Yep. Thank you. So now I'll just edit here. Thank you, Corey. So case when some, that should be it. So what this will do then is produce the results in that column, based on logic that we can use in many different ways. So right now, and we could go edit the label of that as well, but you'll see $2 signs means this is between 50 and 100,000. This is below 50,000. This is more than 100,000. So the same case logic can be used in pretty interesting ways, which we'll see as we go along. But in terms of the projected license, we use this concept a lot to say in this case, if the type of item is a license, return the amount, otherwise return 0. If the type of the item is services, return the amount, return 0. So let's, I'll actually do that in the Word doc just to save us some time. And so this is what we would see is, if the type is of module license, then return the dollar amount. If it's professional services, then return the amount, otherwise return 0. So that's how we can break things into separate columns, even though it's one row on the result. Okay, let's go to our next example, which is the let's see if that popped up again. Our next search would be how do we use formulas to create a clickable link? So at our company, we have a link to Acton. So when Acton submits a new lead and contact into our system, that pop-up that we saw earlier, which will show up in a bit, will say, hey, there's a new lead in there. And then our solution coordinators and the marketing team will go to this search and immediately go to the top of the list and say, hey, we've got a couple contacts that have been entered. we need to call them right away. So they want to be able to come right here and click on this link and go straight to the contact record, because that saves them keystrokes. And the faster we call them back, the better the conversion rate is. So if we go click on that record, let's see where we land. All right, so you'll see that we landed on a NetSuite screen, and in this case, it's a contact screen, and it's for a particular contact, which if you look up and know NetSuite is referencing things by the internal ID, that's one thing we notice. You'll also notice up here that we're already in edit mode. So the one click puts us into the contact screen. We're already ready to edit, and then we can go fill in whatever information we need, you know, and then save it. So how does that work? So essentially what we're doing is we're leveraging some HTML functionality, and there's a thing called the href tag or attribute. And you've probably seen this in embedded emails and things where you get a link in your email that says click here. And when you do, what it's doing is going to, you know, a website that's been built as part of that link. So we can use that same logic within a NetSuite you know, text formula. And so the way that this would work is we're going to create a text formula, and that formula is going to have pieces in it where the first few elements are going to be creating the website within NetSuite that you're calling, including the internal ID of the contact. So that's the web link, and then the next part is what do you show in the column, and that's the name. So if we put all these together, and again, you'll have this reference as we go, the link will look something like this, and this is what goes into the text formula, and clicking on it basically goes to the right web page. It has the right contact internal ID, puts it in edit mode. The font color here makes it blue text, so it looks like a blue hyperlink, web link. And then the contact entity ID is essentially the name that we're presenting in the column. And so the end result is back here on the dashboard. So what this does is it allows us to create clickable links as a result and go straight to something, and in this case in edit mode. So that is just a text formula. So if we go to results, again, in the interest of time, again, text formula, build that link as it's explained in the Word doc, and you'll have your clickable link. And whenever you look at these examples, think about, well, this works for contacts, Rick. We can substitute whatever the page is for the thing that you're trying to click to. So whether that's an opportunity page or a customer page, that's all certainly doable. Okay, next example. We can also use HTML formatting within a result to do color coding. So you'll see here, this is something where this is a list of consultants, for example, and what we do is we say, well, how much did someone bill dollar-wise on the first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day of the month? And then the color coding is to say, you know, if our target is $1,200 of billable, that'll get reported in green. 800 to 1,200, orange. Below 800, it's red. So that's all doable within individual columns. So if we look to see how that's done, it's still using a case statement. This is actually combining several things. So again, you'll digest it later, but we're saying, well, what day of the month did this fall? This would be the first day of the month. You know, then I'm going to multiply the duration or hours times the rate to get to the number. Otherwise, a 0. And if it is greater than 1,200, then I'm going to set my color to green for that number. If that doesn't pass, then we go to, is it greater than 800? Yes, then do orange. Otherwise, red. So lots of potential things going on here. But again, if you take this text, paste it into your formula, then you can adjust, the names or whatever the attributes are. But again, this shows you what can be done, and we can modify the things accordingly. So if we look at this in real time, here's what it looks like for real. And so again, this is looking at last month, but normally it's set to this month. But that's how we can, again, color code things in a individual column. Next thing is we have a lot of metrics around the project health. And so we can look at things like what's the overall project health, look at individual metrics like, well, what's the budget health? What's the resourcing health? So this is the overall health. And you can see here just a colored circle based on attributes. We see progress bars, which will show us a percent consumption of the budget. We can show percent work that's been completed. And then we can compare the two and say, well, we've completed 29% of the work, gone through 33% of the budget. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's green. We come down here, 45% of work complete, 69% of the budget. Well, now we're under, or I'm sorry, over budget. But you might have the opposite. Let's say I've got 95% of the work completed, but only 84% of the budget. We flag that with a purple because that might be good, but it also could mean we missed something in the specification. And so this is just a warning to compare those two. So the way we do those things is, once again, case statements. So this example in the Word doc I don't have in our example, but it's there for future reference. And the example in the document's actually going a step further, where we also can set the color of the progress bar based on conditions. This is how we started out, and then we elected just to go with a regular old progress bar. So again, in the interest of time, you'll see here, if we're within 75%, 85%, greater than 90, set the colors. And what I've tried to do in these examples is color code things that would say this is the number we're comparing, this is the field name. And so you would need to go in and replace your variable, but looking at this, you'd say, I'm dividing one number into another to get my percentage completion. You'll have to make that leap with your data. This example here is how we do this for the progress bar that has no color behind it. And so in that case, all you're doing here is plugging in, let's say the one variable might be a percentage of work complete. Then all you would do is you'd copy this whole guy, paste it into your text formula, and then substitute your variable. So this is the easiest version of the progress bar. This one gets more complicated, but both are representable in a save search column. The last one that we'll show you is the ability to show a summary search or a single row result. In this case, this is a customer search, which is showing us the overall customer balance. But we're also able to show within that one row all the detail of something. In this case, that something is all of the open projects that we have going on and the associated lead consultants for each of those projects. And this is, again, a really interesting result. And the way this is done, there's a function, color dots, same thing, again, as the progress bar. I'll let you look at that. So the aggregate function of like the list ag is a function that can be used to say, all right, I want to go grab detailed data of something, in this case, projects related to this customer. So if we scroll down and look, this is the formula we're using. We're getting a list ag formula, which is looking at all the project types. So if it's, for us, time and materials or fixed fee, then we want to report the customer and the job name of that project, otherwise report nothing. And then this sets the order of those projects within the results. And then the BR in angle brackets is the HTML code for like carriage return. And so this expression is how we build the list of detailed projects within just a single customer row. And so if we were to edit this, we could see that in real time, but we've actually just seen the detail on the Word doc. So this one, again, is really interesting. I was very impressed with our controller, who's the one who came up with this approach. But in this case, like I said, active projects, lead consultant, do we have a deposit? And again, this is a project search. And so we're grouping it by customer, and then the list ag is able to break out the detail, even though the save search is summarized. I haven't looked at questions at all. Let me.
That's okay. I think we've been. I got a couple of those answered. Rick, do you know if there's a limit to the number of nested case statements in a case when statement?
I don't. I mean, that's something where, I would normally go, and I'll do this a lot. If I go to, I could move this toolbar. I Google the Oracle function, so I might say Oracle case statement and look at the official Oracle documentation to see what that might be. Another thing that I Google a lot is like HTML codes, like I might do, HTML date formats or HTML color codes. So I don't know that, but I know where I could find it, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of looking up the SQL, the Oracle SQL definitions. Yeah.
And if you look on my document, I actually do think I have, if I look at the table of contents, there is something in here about like save search using SQL formulas, for example, to be able to calculate what's the percentage of sale of this thing to my overall total, for example. There's a section on SQL expressions, like how can you, I use this in scripting per se, but just, yeah, you got to be able to look things up. No one can remember everything. So Google is, a great tool for that type of research, but I will specifically put Oracle in the keyword to get specifics for Oracle versions of things, but that is in the thing. Let's see, I'm looking at,
I did find a Tech on the Net Oracle case function page. I don't know if I haven't read through it, but that might give some of that information. I just pasted it in the chat.
Yeah, I just, if I bring that up, yeah, we'd have to go look at this. I won't do that in the interest of time. Yeah, so I'm looking at Maureen's question about the aggregated search results, and yeah, I assume that can be done. Reach out if you want some brainstorming on that. And I love the comment, like Tiffany says, this is great. I have no idea this was possible. That's part of what I'm trying to show is like, if you don't know that it exists, you don't even think about it. So that's part of what I'm hoping to do today.
Awesome.
All right. So Margie is saying it's 255 comparisons. And if you think about, these searches, like even with the examples we have today, you'll see that, things can get pretty complex. So a lot of times I will take this type of code and I put it into, my favorite text editor. I use Notepad++ because it has some good tools to show, are my parentheses matching? It's, color code. the functions and the variables and things with different colors, because then you can paste this, the result, once you're convinced it's working, into your formula. So, but these can get really complex. So I'd hate to see 255 case, when statements in there or clauses. That would be really.
You're going to hit the 1,000 character limit before you hit that 255 comparisons, I think.
Is that what you said? It's a
1,000 character limit usually in a.
That's what I said. Yeah, you have that
build, yeah.
So so that might limit you. I was not aware of that, and I don't think I've run up against that. But good to know. Let's see, other questions. I mean, anything else, I'm happy to keep going, but I know I'm kind of over my time.
Yeah, so I think that's awesome. And so all of these documents that you have, you're gonna share, and we're gonna post on our website. They'll be available for download there.
Yes, and I'll give you both the source code for the PowerPoint and the Word document. I won't turn that into PDFs because I want to make sure people can do things like, I want to copy this darn formula.
Yeah.
And paste it in. If it's an image, can't do it. PDF probably, but let's just go right to the source. So I'll send that to the board when we're done. But
awesome.
But yes.
Cool. Thanks, Rick. We really appreciate you taking the time to put this together and to share this information with us. So we're going to move into the open forum. We have, roughly half an hour left of time. And so if there's any